Alright, so this clip is all about lighting and fog. So in order to look at that, we're going to go into the Shadows tab in the default tray. So right now we can't really see any lights or shadows. To turn the shadows on, click on the Show Hide Shadows button. And there we have it. So basically the way it works in SketchUp is that there's a sun somewhere in the sky. And if your model is accurately geolocated, and we're going to talk more about that later, that position of the sun actually corresponds to a real life value of where the sun would be at that specific time of day at that specific time of the year, which in turn allows us to calculate several things such as the factors for passive solar heating and other useful things. So good thing to know. One thing to note here is that even though the lighting system inside of SketchUp is pretty simple, so it's basically a binary system, a given surface is either in light or in shadow. So even though the lighting system inside of SketchUp is pretty simple, enabling shadows does affect performance. So that's why in my working style I work without shadows, but of course if you need to use them in your perspectives for presentation drawings, then it should be enabled. But yeah, it does affect performance, so we'll keep this off for most of the modeling process. So the other thing you can control here is the lightness and darkness of lights and shadows respectively. And yeah, it's pretty simple. So you basically drag the sliders to make your shadows darker and your lights lighter if you need to. I find the default values are fine. Then there's this tick box here, which is use sun for shading. Now, if you tick this on and off when your shadows are turned on, it won't do anything. And that's because this is actually made for when your shadows are off. So when my shadows are off, if I zoom in the camera here, I can see that although these two faces have exactly the same material, this face is lighter for some reason. And the reason for that is that if you don't have this turned on, the light basically comes from the camera. So that's why this face is more lit than this one. If I turn this on, then the light will come from the actual sun that's in the sky. And now this face is more lit. So it doesn't make much of a difference if this is turned on and off, on or off. So I usually just have it off for simplicity's sake for my working style. So the last section here is only works if the shadows are turned on. So basically it's a display section for your shadows. It basically determines what objects are the shadows projected or not projected to. So once again, pretty simple. On faces, projects or doesn't project shadows on the faces of your model. On the ground, does the same thing for the ground. And from edges, this last one basically means that if I make a single vertical edge here, if this is turned on, it will project shadows from the edge as well. So for our modeling style as well as for our presentation styles, we're actually going to have this turned off because our shadows will come from the geometry and we don't want the software to spend calculating power trying to figure out if it should cast shadows from edges as well. And that's about it for shadows. Now, if we transition to the fog tab here, the way fog works in SketchUp is also pretty simple. So it's also a binary system. So this is volumetric fog, which basically means that the fog will get thicker with the distance separating it from the camera. So the one thing to note here is that with these sliders, you can sort of configure the distance at which the fog starts to build and how quickly it builds. And this distance is relative to the camera. So if I move my camera backwards, SketchUp sort of tries to adjust these sliders accordingly. It doesn't always work, so that's why sometimes fog needs to be configured manually for specific scenes. But this is the gist of how it works. You can also change the background color that the fog uses. So if I don't want it to use the background color, which is set to green, I can check this off. And then I can select my own color, let's say white. And now it fades to white. The last thing to note about fog is that just like shadows, it does decrease performance. So once again, not a good idea to have this on in your working style. You'd probably want to see the objects that you're modeling anyway. The only other use of fog is that sometimes it's used in plans when there's an object that's really far away in projection that you don't want to see. Sometimes you will actually want to enable fog just to hide that object if you don't want to make a custom scene and hide that object in it. But yeah, that's about it. Otherwise, mostly fog is used as a presentation tool, just like shadows. And yeah, that covers pretty much this section. So yeah, that's all we needed to see for this clip. The next clip will be focusing on dimensions, units, and shortcuts.